but I don't see me.
You need to click on the view. Maybe you can go to gallery. And I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody until they're speaking.
Hello, David. Hello, Dean. You're muted, David. Dean, you're muted. If you're speaking, we can't hear you. Dean?
Have I been muted this whole time?
Yes.
I'm going to start over and make it even briefer. Welcome, folks, to this event sponsored by the Community Church of Boston and the Sacco and Vanzetti Commemoration Society. Welcome to all of you who are joining us. We dedicate this event especially to the memory of Bob Datilio. Bob Datilio, scholar of the subject of tonight's event, Sacco and Vanzetti. Bob Datilio, who passed away in fall of last year. And we remember him fondly as a mover and shaker and keeper of the flame of Sacco and Vanzetti. And Bob Datilio presente is what we say tonight. I want to open the event today, which is a rich event, with a reading from our good friend and member of Community Church of Boston, David Rothauser, who has also deeply researched Sacco and Vanzetti and played Venzetti in his own film, documentary about the case. David Rothauser is going to give us a dramatic reading of the words of Venzetti. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dean, and welcome everyone to this program. I feel privileged to speak tonight about Elizabeth Glendower Evans. Elizabeth Glendower Evans was a Boston Brahmin, a resident of Beacon Hill, who took it upon herself at the tender age of 66 to get involved with the Sacco Vanzetti case, to support Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Venzetti by conspiring to speak out in their behalf by providing material support to the two perceived terrorists and by defrauding the United States government by organizing a coterie of Beacon Hill women to teach English to the two men so they could defend themselves in the courtroom. One of the women was Gertrude Winslow, secretary of the Community Church of Boston, the first church in America to come out publicly in support of Sacco and Vanzetti. Mrs. Evans took on the mantle of the working class by joining the suffragists in 1909. Her entrance into the movement was traumatically described in her own words. Mrs. Fitzgerald called me on the telephone. Will you go on down to Fall River and speak to the factory workers? Do you think I'm going to do that kind of work? I tell you, I'm far too well born. She pleaded with me to speak to the girls at the factories. I knew that they were, who are not well born, worked long hours at the factory, so I said, well, I'll go. As I left the train, there was a woman in a shabby white dress carrying a big yellow banner. Oh God, have I got to be associated with her? Sure enough, she walked up and said, is this Mrs. Evans? Together we boarded a trolley car where she unrolled her banner and flouted it side by side. I thought I should go through the floor. Actually, I became a really great outdoor speaker, really a good one. I always began my speeches with the thought, I haven't died yet, so I must say something. Mrs. Evans worked tirelessly for Sacco and Vanzetti's defense, literally raising hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep the case alive. Their relationship became so close that they came to love her and regarded her as a second mother. Auntie B, as she liked to be called, lavished upon them endless supplies of flowers, candy, and fruit, to which prompted Venzetti to write, please don't bring so many flower and fruit. I could have enough here to open a fruit stand in Boston. Evans also sent Venzetti several Lives of Jesus books, which he insisted only make me sick. Apparently, she failed to take their atheism seriously. At one point, Sacko broke with Mrs. Evans for joining forces with his attorney, Fred Moore, in the formation of the New Trail League, a splinter group of the Sacco Vanzetti Defense Committee. After Moore retired from the case, with the insistence of Sacko, Sacko reunited with Auntie B. Dear Auntie B, I report you a poem of Beauty Black Red Rose. There's a rambler on the trellis and a wild rose in the hedge, with a gay and golden Marechal Niel upon the arbor's edge. There's a sweetheart bud a-tapping at the window of my room, and my heart is singing, singing, for the roses are in bloom. Mrs. Evans devoted the remaining 10 years of her life to writing about her two friends and wrote in her will that most of her estate should go to the Sacco family and other leftist causes, rather than to her relatives, the Gardners. While on her deathbed, her nephew, Pennington Gardner, protested vehemently and tore the radical part of her will to shreds. An excerpt of her original will confirms her consistent belief in her radical sympathies and love for Sacco and Vanzetti. To those who may feel that I am too strange in ranking people not of my blood with my own family. Had I children of my own, no one would have criticized me for leaving all that I had to them. Now these children, not of my own, and these causes, which seem so remote to most of the well-to-do, should be ranked as my very own, as children who are the issue of my very life. Thank you.
Then the words of Venzetti that are on the plaque that is behind me. It says, "What I wish for more than all in this last hour of agony is that our case and our fate may be understood in their real being and serve as a tremendous lesson to the forces of freedom, so that our suffering and death will not have been in vain." So thank you, everybody, for joining us. There are 48 of us here, and more on the YouTube channel. I want to hand the microphone with great gratitude to Michele Fazio for organizing tonight's roundtable conversation with some wonderful presenters and authorities and researchers on the Sacco and Vanzetti case. Michele.
Thanks, Dean. I'm really happy to be here. I actually want Sergio Reyes to speak first to give us some context.
I forgot about that.
That's okay.
So, Sergio, it is your turn. Sergio Reyes joins us from Punta Arenas, Chile, way on the southern tip. Sergio lived in Boston many times and was an active member of the Sacco and Vanzetti Commemoration Society while here, and is still an active member, although far away. Thank you for being here, Sergio, and thank you for what you do and for your life of activism and work.
Thank you. Today I was asked to speak about the history of the Sacco and Vanzetti Commemoration Society in 5 minutes, which is better than a meeting of anarchists that I was invited once, and I was asked to speak about May Day history in 1 minute. I don't know if Jake remembers that. Well, let's start. In 2006, these young anarchists that I speak about decided to mark the day of the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti with a march from Stony Brook Park in Jamaica Plain to the Forest Hills Cemetery, which is where the bodies of the two men were cremated. Members of the Boston May Day Coalition were contacted to support this event, and we did. The event marked the beginning of what came to be the Sacco and Vanzetti Commemoration Society. The following year, 2007, we commemorated the 80th anniversary of the judicial murder of the two innocent men with a march on the streets of Boston from Copley Square to the North End. We also held 2 more days of commemoration, then very ambitious, one for cultural presentations like poetry, music, and theater, and a 3rd day for movies about the case. For the first time then, the Boston City Council signed a proclamation sponsored by then Councilor Felix Arroyo, stating that day as Sacco and Vanzetti Commemoration Day in the city of Boston. On July 2007, we filed articles of organization at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, showing as address 33 Harrison Avenue, the offices of Encuentro Cinco. Our mission said, the Sacco and Vanzetti Commemoration Society exists to preserve the memory of Sacco and Vanzetti's struggle to radically change society. We want to educate our neighbors about Massachusetts radical history and draw connections between the struggles of Sacco and Vanzetti and similar struggles today. We stand against the death penalty and political persecution, as well as the persecution and scapegoating of immigrants. We have been faithful to that mission all these years. One of the educational objectives, the erection of a public monument on the streets of Boston, nonetheless, it's still pending. That same year, 2007, on December, we rededicated a historical plaque that had been removed from 256 Hanover Street, the place where the Sacco and Vanzetti Defense Committee functioned from 1925 to 1927. Remarkably, then we were honored by the presence and the messages of former Governor Michael Dukakis. Since then, the marches on Boston and the city council proclamations were celebrated every year until 2015. After Felix Arroyo was no longer on the council, councilors Chuck Turner and later Councilor Charles Yancey offered the proclamations every year. In November 2008, we held a major event at the Dante Alighieri Center featuring Howard Zinn. This was our largest public event. The number of active supporters of the Sacco and Vanzetti Commemoration Society dwindled down with the passing of years. However, a small group of us have continued to keep this subject alive. Since 2015, when we no longer had the strength to organizing public marches, we moved on to commemorate Bartolomeo and Nicola's sacrifice on indoor events featuring musicians, historians, writers, poets. We have always counted with the support of friends from the Community Church of Boston, Encuentro 5, the Boston May Day Coalition, and radicals and progressives. This 94th anniversary of the Sacco and Vanzetti execution is another such commemoration, and we are pleased we have this time a distinguished panel of women reflecting on this historical event. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. And I'd like to just say to Michele, I'm glad I made that boo-boo because now I get to talk about what I forgot to talk about before. The first is to talk about our annual Sacco Vanzetti Award, which Community Church of Boston grants once every year to a notable activist, especially to activists who have suffered deeply for their activism. Just in June, we gave the Sacco and Vanzetti Award to Julian Assange. It was received by his brother and his father, who were on a tour to promote his freedom, and it was a wonderful event that we had for them. We have been giving this award since 1978, and it's really a notable list of folks. You should check our website, communitychurchofboston.org. There's a list of all the people who have received our award over the course of those years. I want to invite you to join Community Church on our Sunday mornings coming up. It will be both a virtual as well as a physical gathering. We will broadcast, and we will have some speakers here, and we will have some broadcast from far away. And the first one I'm very proud to tell you about is named Louise Half Sky Dancer, and she is the poet laureate of the country of Canada. Just was named that, and she is the first First Nations poet laureate of Canada. And we are just really very happy that she will be with us on our observance of Indigenous Peoples Day on October 10th. And that is the very first meeting of Community Church of Boston. Michele Fazio, it has been such a pleasure to meet you because of the sad circumstance of the passing of Bob Datilio, but just getting a little glimpse into the depth of your scholarship and your commitment to preserve the legacy of Sacco and Vanzetti has been just a wonderful thing, both for me personally and for Community Church of Boston. And thank you for organizing tonight's speakers. Michele.
Thanks, Dean. I'm going to share my screen. I have a very short presentation to make. I just want to give a quick shout out to my graduate students that are in the audience. It's our first class tonight, and I'm making them come here. So I'm excited that they're here. So I am truly honored to be a part of tonight's roundtable and to share space with my fellow presenters as we begin the process of moving forward, building off of what Sergio just said, of considering how we might remember Sacco and Vanzetti today. Admittedly, it is a daunting task to overcome a silence that has shaped Boston's history since the 1920s. And I want to begin by recalling two events that occurred in the year 1937 in order to provide some context for the suppression of Sacco and Vanzetti in Boston's history. In the midst of the Great Depression, as part of President Roosevelt's New Deal, Works Progress Administration, the Federal Writers Project sought to rediscover America by representing its diversity. One way the program accomplished this goal was by creating state guides, which offered a complete history, a study of its people, places, and history. The Massachusetts State Guide, published on August 18th, 1937, included entries on Sacco and Vanzetti, as well as the overview of labor strikes that took place throughout the state. Within 24 hours, the Federal Writers' National Office in DC faced a backlash by local officials in Boston who deemed the inclusion of Sacco and Vanzetti too politically charged and contentious. The public outcry eventually led to the guide's revision a year later. According to historian Christine Bold, this was an act of censorship that was kept secret. The revised guide not only shifted perspective from the struggle of workers to a focus on the region's industry, it also reduced references to Sacco and Vanzetti in the Boston, Dedham, and Braintree sections. Furthermore, the editors erased Sacco and Vanzetti's execution from the state's chronological record. Just days later, on August 23rd, the Sacco and Vanzetti Memorial Committee offered the city of Boston the Borglum plaque to display on the Boston Common. This suggestion was summarily dismissed, and as we know, efforts were made again in 1947 and 1957. Both were met with equal resistance by state and local officials. In 2020, a People's Guide to Greater Boston was published. Written by Joseph Nevins, Sharon Moodliar, and Eleni Makrakis, the book serves as a counter-narrative to the Massachusetts State Guide. It offers, as explained in the series forward, quote, an alternative view of urban life and history that documents the rich and vibrant stories of political struggle, oppression, and resistance in the everyday landscapes of metropolitan regions. The story of Sacco and Vanzetti is in the city of Boston is one such struggle. One of the guide's most interesting features is its thematic tours. The Sacco and Vanzetti walking tour details the sites of where the men worked, where they were arrested and jailed. It maps out the Braintree crime site, as well as the funeral procession and march to Forest Hill Cemetery in Jamaica Plain. As you can see, the two men are featured prominently on the cover. These two examples of guidebooks frame this evening's discussion. On the one hand, Boston's long history of silencing and erasing its working class history and ties to labor radicalism, and on the other, the continuing efforts of those seeking to overcome the suppression of Sacco and Vanzetti from public record. The Sacco and Vanzetti Commemoration Society is interested in creating dialogue to share ideas and concerns about taking the next steps to making the memorialization of Sacco and Vanzetti a reality. We recognize this effort is more than one individual or that a small group can handle. Instead, we are hoping to build a larger coalition of scholars, activists, labor organizers, elected officials, artists, community members, and many others who are interested in preserving Boston's public memory. As you listen to tonight's speakers, we invite members of the audience to consider the following questions. Why remember Sacco and Vanzetti? What keeps drawing people to continuously engage in their memory? How do we teach the controversies of the case, both in schools and in our communities? These are just a few points to generate tonight's discussion. Feel free to post in the chat. And I will do my best to introduce these comments and questions during the Q&A session as much as I can. I'm hoping it'll be a really active discussion that follows. So I'd like to introduce now journalist Stephanie Shoro, who has written 7 books on Boston history. She currently coordinates a citizen journalism program for Malden's Urban Media Arts and teaches professional writing and editing at LaSalle University in Newton, Massachusetts. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and I am so delighted to be here. I have been fascinated by this case for a long time. I've not been as involved as many of the others in this audience, although I did speak at the community church in the 1990s about this case. But to put it in context, I'm a red diaper baby. My parents were members of the Communist Party, and something that they did not share with me as I was growing up, but their house, our house, was a repository of all sorts of subversive literature, including this book, and this is the actual book. You can see it's in pretty sad shape, Boston by Upton Sinclair. And as I think I was 12 or 13, I picked it up and started reading it and immediately became fascinated with the Sacco and Vanzetti case. One thing to say about that is I became interested in it through basically fiction, through the creation of a character, probably based a little bit on Mrs. Evans, who we were talking about tonight. But I was drawn into the case through as a fictional techniques, which then led me, began my journey, and this was during the Vietnam era, questioning so much more about the American system. And Sacco and Vanzetti was part of that. Fast forward to 1997, I was a reporter for the Boston Herald, back in the day before the Boston Herald kind of fell off the cliff politically, just throw that in. And I started working, it was on the 70th anniversary of the Sacco and Vanzetti case. And I started thinking about this question, was there a memorial for Sacco and Vanzetti in the city? That search led me to something that many people here already knew, which was the Borglum plaque at the Boston Public Library and the existence of a finished bronze plaque, which has since disappeared. And so I wrote about this issue. I wrote about the plaque. Later that year, the Mayor Menino officially accepted the plaque for the city without, I might add, commenting on the guilt or innocence of the two men. It looked like the plaque was going to finally get into a public space, and then it disappeared. There was some question about making a reproduction of it. So brings us to where we are right now. What do we do about this plaque? And so much has happened even in that time. And I think some of the other speakers will talk about, do we want to, this Borglum plaque by Gutzon Borglum, who is now a bit problematic in terms of our perception of American history, do we continually want to bring this plaque forward as a memorial to Sacco and Vanzetti, or do we want to think of something else and create something different? This is a key issue for Boston. And just to put it in a wider context, I write about Boston history. And I also have written about a place that some of you may know about, if you will admit it, which is the combat zone, which was the red light district of Boston. And I usually start off my talks about why write about the combat zone, a place of nefarious activities. And the point is, it is part of Boston history, and we have to accept that. I'm also involved with an effort now to memorialize the victims or the fire, the Coconut Grove nightclub fire of 1942. And there's been a lot of discussion, and I believe the city has actually allocated money to put up a memorial to this event, a hugely tragic event. More than 500 people lost their lives. Why do we want to remember that? Probably for no reason than to bring back the lessons of the past, which is fire safety. And I think we can look at the Sacco and Vanzetti, the question of memorializing them in that context. How can we bring back a memorial, whether it's a Borglum plaque or something else, that starts the discussion, that keeps it talking, that ensures that Michele's graduate students of today will talk about it and discover this case, much as I did in my parents' library so many years ago. So let me end there with hopefully we will have some discussion on these issues, and go back to Michele, who's going to introduce the next panelist.
Thank you, Stephanie. So our next speaker is Adrian Naylor. She was a founding member of the Sacco and Vanzetti Commemoration Society. As a graduate student, she researched attempts to publicly commemorate the anarchists in Boston.
So yeah, that was in 2008 that I was doing that research, so I'm a little rusty. They asked me to talk about why do young anarchists care about Sacco and Vanzetti, and I was like, I'm 37 years old, and I haven't been involved in anything for a while. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was just how little has changed in terms of if you care about immigrants' rights, if you care about not killing people as punishment, if you care about justice and fair trials, and I feel like everything, it's all there. So what we, the young anarchists, were bringing to this commemoration effort was drawing the parallels to all of the various ways that immigrants continue to be scapegoated, deported, all sorts of bad things. And I remember we made bilingual flyers for the 2007 event, and it was like 80 years ago, the government like persecuted anarchists and immigrants. And I remember the Spanish one said, nada ha cambiado, nothing has changed. But yeah, why do we still care? What keeps drawing us back? When I went into the archives in the Boston Public Library, the Felicani collection's amazing. But because it was a public history class, I think, so everything was about the attempts to memorialize, like what are we trying to do to keep the memory in public? And I found the meeting notes from 8 days after the execution. So what would that have been, like August 31st, 1928? Yeah, they made up a 5-point plan of what they wanted to accomplish going forward, instead of being the Sacco and Vanzetti Defense Committee, being the Memorial Committee. And point number 5 was a memorial to Sacco and Vanzetti. So this is not a new discussion that we're having. I also wrote down a quote that someone delivered at the 1-year anniversary event in 1928. There was a crowd of 2,000 people gathered in Boston, and the speaker said that men and women are still anxious to do something, to right the wrong, to do honor to the memory of Sacco and Vanzetti. And yeah. Did I talk long enough?
Yeah. Thanks, Adrian. Okay, so next, our final speaker is Stephanie Yule. She is the W.-authored Garrity Professor in Human Nature, Ethics, and Society, and Professor of History at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Mass. She's also associate faculty in the Critical Conservation Program at the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. Stephanie.
Thanks, Michele. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And I guess I'll pick up where Adrian left off, and talk about my own engagement with this question came from getting this job at Holy Cross in the early 2000s and thinking that I would be able to take my students into Boston on a kind of radical Boston tour, because I work on early 20th century, I did in the 20th century, but was teaching an early 20th century class. And I was really frustrated and surprised that that I felt like there was nothing. To me, an outsider coming from California, not living on the East Coast, not understanding the work that had already started. And so I thought, this seems like a real problem, right? It's an erasure, as Michele was talking about, and it becomes a question of power. And so started doing some research and was able to actually participate and as a spectator marcher in that 2007 parade. And it was such great timing because you all, got it together and we're doing this parade. And in the process of writing this at first, and I'm saying this so to get at the second part of our question tonight, which is, where do we go from here? And so that's what I want to focus on, not where we've been, but where do we go from here, which I think is really Michele's sort of push to get us together and start a good conversation. And so where I started with that question back in 2007 was, well, where are we? And it seemed to be this plaque. And then I thought to myself, I got all sort of exercised and frothy over, well, why hasn't this been put in public? And why isn't there a statue? And why isn't there more markers and blah, blah, blah. And then the Dukakis Memorial Day proclamation, and I thought, well, that's good, but why isn't there more? Why isn't there more? And then I thought to myself, well, why should we expect the state to do this? Right? I mean, that just seems totally contrary to the whole notion of what Sacco and Vanzetti stood for. And really, do you want the state to be responsible steward? Can they be a responsible steward for anarchists and outside political ideological minorities and immigrants? And so where does that responsibility reside? And so that's why I was so energized and excited by the parade, because to me, this spoke to this whole, as a scholar, this body of scholarship about memory being performative, and that if we're talking about silencing, a statue is silent. And I hate to break it to everybody, but the average amount of time the average visitor to a museum spends, that's a museum where you spent money, reading a copy is about 17 seconds. Much less driving by one more statue in the city of Boston. Now, I'm not saying there shouldn't be a statue, but what I'm saying is, I think we're a little burdened by two histories here. I think we're burdened by the history of that Borglum plaque, and that's limiting the imagination. And I think we're burdened by the Dukakis proclamation, which really was itself a domesticating, talking about this was a miscarriage of justice, and not really about the men and their, as Dean said, the real being, which is quoted on that plaque, right? The big idea. So the parade to me was so beautiful, and the music, Jake, I heard you play the music, the stilts, it was just beautiful. And it felt like what can't be silenced are bodies in the street and activists and education in the classrooms. I mean, to me, so when we talk about where do we go from here, it seems to me, do people who are stakeholders want to keep fighting the same fight, as Adrian correctly points out, has been being discussed since 1928, for something that, if we look at recent history, has become really static? Like, look at the various memorial and statue debates that are going on right now. Or is there something else that the death of Sacco and Vanzetti and their ideology can creatively produce out of this group of people and other people that is more about art and poetry and performance and taking over, colonizing space in the city on various dates and not just on a commemoration, because commemorations tend to be kind of problematic. They tend not to be as nuanced, if you did something sort of regularly. I don't really know what the answer is, and I know it requires a lot of energy and commitment, and the Sacco and Vanzetti Commemorative Society had that energy and commitment for so long. But I would challenge this group of people who are here tonight who care to say, what if you were to start from scratch and take everything away? What do you think, believing what you believe about these men and their deaths and our contemporary moment, what do you think looks appropriate to you and inspirational to you? And if there can be any agreement on that, because to me, it would not probably be a statue. I'm a little statued out. They're too inert, and the whole point of their ideology was about action and revolutionary transformation, as the mission statement of the SVCS was talking about. So I would like us to, in this conversation, to talk about, so what next, right? And not so much like the mystery of this missing plaque and the this, that, and the other, but you can be revolutionary and start from scratch, right? And what would that look like? And for me, what really resonated was that parade and all that art and all that making of these men from 100 years ago relevant to the struggle today. So those are my comments. I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I'm going to ask folks now, if you'd like to speak you could certainly raise your hand or put it in the chat. I think some of the questions were answered about the missing plaque by Adrian. So Stephanie's questions here are really relevant. Where do we go from here and what does it look like? Jake, go right ahead.
I had seen someone else's hand up first if they wanted to start, but no. All right. Wow. Well, thank you everybody for the great presentations. What Adrienne was just talking about how important it was when we were starting this project to, make it relevant to the struggles that were occurring right now, still holds really true to me. I really like what Stephanie just said. And if, sound probably even more stubborn than otherwise, but if we were to start all over, I'd probably say the exact same thing that I said back in 2006, which is the best way to honor Sacko and Vanzetti's memory is to continue their struggles and fight the fight that they can't fight. Sacko and Vanzetti probably met on a picket line. So, it's not only important to remember their deaths, but also, their lives, the lives that they lived, the struggles they fought, what was important to them, and the new world that they were trying to create where people would have freedom and equality and oppression would be destroyed by the oppressed, self-organized. Sacko and Vanzetti, their case is really at the intersection of race, class, and state repression. And as Adrian said, these things they haven't changed. They're in the news every day. So the relevance and justice to their memory to me is definitely more important than a monument. I've always been in favor of there being a monument, but mostly as a place for us to rally. We're 6 years away from the 100th anniversary of their death. And I think the interest is definitely going to renew in this case. I haven't been able to participate so much in planning these events in recent years since I had kids and moved out of the city for a while. And I really appreciate everything that Sergio, Bob, Michele, so many others have done to keep this going. And I'm hoping to participate more, but I could really see us using the next 5 years to build this memory out, to invite people who are engaged in these struggles today to speak at these events and hopefully build the momentum back up to be having these parades again. I think we need to be championing the causes of the oppressed. I think that Black Lives Matter, for instance, should be doing these events yearly. We should be highlighting anarchists and other people who are in prison, representatives of undocumented folks detained at the border. I realize I've been going on for a while, so I'm going to stop. Thank you again, everybody.
Thanks, Jake.
May I speak, Michele?
Yeah. Hi, Leonard.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for organizing this every year. It's a very devoted group here, I know. I have a couple of things I want to share with you. First is a plaque, not the plaque we've been talking about, but a plaque that was given to us in Torre Maggiore on August 7th, 2000.
Mm-hmm.
This is from the city of Torre Maggiore, the birthplace of Nicola Sacco. And the mayor made this plaque for me and Helene because we performed some excerpts from the opera that was then in progress that Mark Blitzstein began. Actually, Mark Blitzstein wrote an opera about Sacco and Vanzetti in 1930. It was never performed. And then in 59, he was commissioned by the Ford Foundation to write a full-length opera that the Met optioned. And he died in 1964 without completing it. I completed it in 2001 after that trip to Torre Maggiore, inspired by Bob DiTilio, who gave us the context there. I want to show you one other thing. If you don't know this book, it's one of the best, I think. It's called Representing Sacco and Vanzetti, and it's based on a conference that was held at Hofstra University in 2005. Howard Zinn, who of course wrote the foreword to the new edition of Boston, was the keynote speaker at this conference. One of the two organizers was Marianne Trasciatti, a professor at Hofstra, and Marianne is going to be giving a brief lecture on October 19th on Zoom to introduce two evenings, October 19th and October 21st, part of Hofstra's Italian American lecture series, where we will be playing the video, the complete video, and interviewing singers from the opera's production of 2001 and the opera that was done at the White Barn Theater in Westport, Connecticut, and the hopefully the New York premiere and orchestral premiere. These were each scheduled and have each been postponed because of COVID. So we don't have a date yet for the New York premiere. We did have dates in last year and this year, but they've been postponed. And the orchestral premiere was scheduled for next February at UCLA. That too has been postponed. But as you've all been talking about this 7-year period of commemorating Sacco and Vanzetti from 2020 to 2027, sometime within that period, I know that this is going to happen. I don't know exactly where or when, but it will happen. Howard Zinn got Carol Charno interested in the opera when she had a company in Boston, and she told me, I want to do this opera in Boston. I just don't have the right venue for it. It's too big for the small venue that we have, and it won't be attracting enough of an audience. It isn't commercial enough for the large venue we have. She said, I need a middle venue, and I'm looking for it. Well, she didn't find it before the opera company that she was heading went bankrupt. So we're still looking for the right venue. I think Hofstra is the right venue. It didn't happen last year. It's not happening this year, but it will happen. Most likely there within this period. Watch for it before 2027 or maybe in 2027. It will happen. And I want to encourage all of you to keep in touch and to have these events and to come to our event. As I say, it's October 19th and 21st, 6:30 p.m. We're going to be doing the first half of the opera and then the second half of the opera with discussion with singers who were in it and will be in it. Marianne Trasciatti is speaking. Another Italian-American professor at Hofstra will also be speaking. Just, please everybody, keep this in your calendar and come and keep sending us your calendar events so that we can participate with you. Okay. Thank you very much, Michele, for letting me speak. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Thanks, Leonard. And I'm hopeful too. It'll happen. Stephanie has her hand up. Stephanie.
Great. Well, I just want to build on what Leonard and some of these other people have said and really take up the other Stephanie's challenge, which is to think differently about this, to take this from scratch. We already can see the formation of many different ideas, arts and culture through an opera, plays. I know that's been something there. Conferences, I see people here who've organized judicial conferences, books. And I'll throw out one idea is perhaps books that aren't necessarily on the case, but are part of a series where we ask people of today from Black Lives Matter, from different groups to contribute an essay and put that on the commemoration. So I do think that there's good ways to think very differently about this. I think whatever we do, whether it's a memorial, it's to, the academics will say, teach the controversy, but I think it goes deeper than that. It's to say, why does this case continue to have relevance today? And how can we draw this in multimedia formats, book formats, other things? I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but I do think that there's a real opportunity here to create a number of venues. And yes, we hate anniversaries, but why, but there will be a lot of attention in 7 years. So not a bad idea to start planning for that now. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Charlie.
Unmute, Charlie.
My picture just moved, so I
There you go.
had to find it again to unmute myself. Unfortunately, it's raining in Boston. I was going to pull off something tonight. I figured out a way to project from Community Church onto one of the buildings near us, a large video projection, and I was going to, I can only do text, but I was going to do something about talking about Boston Remembers Sacco and Vanzetti with the dates and everything. Unfortunately, the rain washed it out, but sometime in the not too distant future, I hope to do something like that. Over.
Michele, may I add on to that a little bit?
Yeah.
Community Church of Boston has this parallel history with Sacco and Vanzetti. They were arrested and charged right around when we were founded, 1920, and our very first event listed in our archives is a fundraising supper for Sacco and Vanzetti held at a big banquet hall nearby, somewhere near the Back Bay or Copley Square. I've been thinking about this and have sort of, without anybody's permission, been calling Sacco and Vanzetti our martyr patron saints in a way that associates the church status of this funky non-church of a church, really a church in all the good ways. And I thought about high holy days too. And there's of course Labor Day and Independent, and National Day of Mourning that we could have to celebrate Native people. There's the Indigenous Peoples Day. And my favorite one, though, is April Fool's Day. That's the one that really should be our high holy day, and we should do something very special about how we're fools for social justice. And but how about a Sacco and Vanzetti Day that Community Church spearheads and does something around getting in good trouble and good mischief, like Charlie was just mentioning. And in solidarity with some cause that's burning in the city of Boston and on the planet at that moment. How about climate change? How about the Extinction Rebellion or the Sunrise Movement? How about the people who are about to march from Springfield to Boston in an effort to raise awareness about mass incarceration and about a need to end spending on more prisons in this state. Just a thought that I had, and maybe something for us to organize around for now and forever, around August 23rd, the day that they were executed, Sacco and Vanzetti Day, a day that the Community Church gets behind to celebrate and to observe and to get into good trouble.
Thanks, Dean. I love that idea, and there's been some excellent ideas put in the chat. Stephanie, your suggestion about like an anthology coming from all different directions is a great one. I mean, my wish list, and I don't know if this is aging me, but I love the idea of public art, of putting out a call for local artists in the Boston community, and maybe even reaching out to art programs at all the universities to have students and young people design a public art project that's interactive and community building. I mean, I'm thinking about a mural, and there's beautiful murals in cities across America. And why couldn't we have Sacco and Vanzetti as part of that mural, but not front and center. It could represent all of those ideas about racial and class injustice, incarceration, oppression, and it will tell a story about Boston. And I'm thinking too, Jake, when you talked, I was there protesting for the Battery Wharf hotel workers who went on strike in 2019. I was in the city for 2 days and I went there and showed support. That's keeping Sacco and Vanzetti alive to me, right? And I think that's the kind of thing we should be doing. So I just think getting young people and I'm getting my young people, my graduate students here doing this kind of work to bring it into their classroom. I want to build this momentum forward as well. And I love that idea, Dean, of having some kind of community building effort every year that's inclusive and not just a selection of speakers. That's static. And I think we are at a moment we have to go past this and make this much more interactive and inclusive across ages, across regions, and get people involved to create whatever it is that gets created. I'm happy if just one thing gets created. But I'm with the Stephanies. I'm putting you two together. Sorry, that it can't be a static statue. It has to be something that lives and grows. And I think children and younger people can really bring a lot of energy and creativity to this project. And that's what's so badly needed. Stephanie, Yule.
So here's another idea, but I don't know. This might be, again, like trusting the state to tell the story. So I might be folding back on myself. But, Massachusetts Department of Education and Secondary Education came out with, elementary and secondary education, came out with new frameworks for social studies. And in that, I'm very happy to point out that LGBTQ history is now part of that, right? And so that's some of the work that I do in my more recent scholarship. And so I've been working with the Worcester Public Schools to use local organizing from the early 70s of a Worcester Gay Union for anti-discrimination in housing and employment to move that into the lesson planning for local Worcester schools. Why are we talking about Stonewall only that happened in New York? Let's inspire kids with what happened right here in the city, right? In Worcester. And so I wonder, I real quickly looked up the frameworks and Sacco and Vanzetti from 2018 are mentioned in those frameworks, but then there's a clarification statement. Very interestingly, it's almost like the WPA narratives that say the Sacco and Vanzetti, Bread and Roses strike, et cetera, are used as examples of the tensions of the time. And so that to me sounds a lot like the Dukakis domesticating, right, thing. And so again, I'm really into the idea of young people and it'd be great if we could, organize certain kinds of, identify different school districts or different teachers or different, that might be willing to bring some of the material in a lively way into their classrooms. And I just want to shout out to, I forget, I'm sorry, because I don't know everyone, so I apologize. Was it Pat or Peter? Pat, who made the comment about technology and new audiences and a kind of digital presence. I think that's a really brilliant idea as well. But I think the lesson plan, like in an ideal world, that would be really exciting in terms of disseminating. But in a real world, it probably becomes domesticated. But it's something to consider for activism.
Yeah.
Could I just say something in response to what was just said, or I think was just said about Governor Mike Dukakis? Bob Datilio used to call him our sainted governor. And he sometimes meant that a little sarcastically because he didn't agree with everything that Dukakis did, but he certainly agreed with everything he said in the exoneration statement. And I spoke with Governor Mike about this question. People say, well, he didn't pardon them, and he didn't say that they were innocent. And he said to me, I didn't pardon them because that would have meant that they were guilty. I exonerated them. I said they didn't have a fair trial. They have to be presumed innocent, and therefore they are exonerated. Now, and that's about as far as he could go, I think. And I think that he really does deserve a lot of credit for this. And the Blitzstein estate and I had a very intense conversations about the fact that Michael Dukakis's 1977 exoneration statement basically closed the case. And until then, there was still a lot of doubt, and some people still express doubt, but I think they deserve to be shouted down. The thing is that when the opera, when Blitzstein died in '64, they were still debating in the assembly in Boston, in the state legislature, what to do about Sacco and Vanzetti, and that debate actually found its way into the opera. There's a whole scene in the opera about that, and the Blitzstein estate and I agreed that was out of date, and we cut that scene and put a scene at the end with Michael Dukakis exonerating them. And that was something that I was criticized for, because after all, it didn't happen during Blitzstein's lifetime. But the theory was, and the state endorsed it 100%, that were Blitzstein alive at the time of the Dukakis exoneration, he would have put closure on the opera, just as Dukakis put closure on the case. And so that's where we are in terms of that.
Thanks. I wanted to just respond to Stephanie and maybe Pat. I have an undergrad student that I'm working with, and she's creating a digital story map on the case of Sacco and Vanzetti, and it's related to my research project. So I'm hoping to find that website a home, and it could be the Commemoration Society and I want everyone to be able to use this as a resource in their classrooms. But I do think the future of keeping Sacco and Vanzetti alive starts with these lesson plans. And I like that idea of a children's book. I'm gonna ponder that one. How to put this into that story, into that format. But I know we're nearing the end of our time. So if anyone has another comment.
I think Peter has his hand up. Peter's had his hand up.
Peter, yes.
Thanks, Michele, and thank you all. I've enjoyed this very much. Just a couple of quick points. I agree with Leonard's observations about the exoneration versus the pardon. And having worked for Mike Dukakis for many years and know him well, and having talked to him about this, one of the things people often overlook is that to be pardoned, someone has to acknowledge their guilt. They have to be able to say, I did this, and then the executive can pardon them. Well, of course, Sacco and Vanzetti went to their death denying with their last breath that their responsibility for this crime for which they were convicted. So that would have disqualified them.
Peter, the petition to Governor Fuller was only signed by one of the defendants.
That's right. That's right.
The other one, and exactly because he didn't want to acknowledge guilt, right?
The other point is, having listened to many wonderful suggestions, I spent many, many hours with Robert Titilio, hundreds of hours. He really brought me into this and led me through a better understanding of this. And one of the things that Bob envisioned, I think, as a lasting memorial was a digital, a living digital memorial, I guess is the way I would describe it in 2021 terms. As far back as the 90s, I attended meetings with Bob in which we were trying at that time to get collections of Sacco Vanzetti material digitized, and it was just too expensive, and it never really made we never really made very much progress. Well, of course, today much has been accomplished. The major collections have been digitized, but it's only a fraction of what the two men in the case really represent. And to give an example, I recently heard a story that the largest living thing on the earth is a mushroom in Oregon, which at first makes no sense whatsoever. But this mushroom is on top of a mountain, and the tentacles or the mycelium from this mushroom underground go for hundreds and hundreds of miles, and it's all considered to be one organism. And in a sense, that's how I think of Sacco and Vanzetti. They influenced virtually every major development in the second half of the 20th century, and that continues to this day. And they touched the lives of so many people that when you consider it in its totality, there's no event like it in history. And I think that there's a way to represent that digitally and to design it in such a way that it would not be static. It would be alive, it would grow, it would develop as each new generation comes along. That's not a very articulate way of putting it, but that's what I think Bob Titilio's vision of how to memorialize Sacco and Vanzetti was.
All right.
Thanks, Peter. So Dean, are we going to close it with Jake?
Let's close it with two things. One quick thing I want to show folks is something we discovered recently. If I can share, this is a beautiful. It's double, but it's a poster by the artist Paul Normandia, and it was among a bunch of murals that were created for the Wake Up the Earth Festival, spontaneous celebrations, that marvelous community organization in Jamaica Plain. And this is one that we're trying to turn into a sandwich board to have on Sacco and Vanzetti Day, which should have been today, out in front of the church. Another idea I had was we've been talking about taking this plaque and making a copy of it, and there's been since Bob's passing some talk about that, and some initiative that seems to have fallen on its face now. But I was thinking of having a smaller one that you could have on wheels, and we just keep it in the lobby and take it out on key days and roll it around. It could be a bronze, but about a third of the size of the one we have here. So that's the one thing. The other wonderful thing that we get to end this event with is Jake and the Infernal Machine, which is Jake Carmen, who we heard earlier on, and his daughter Bridget May Carmen, who are going to take us out with this lovely song. If I can find it and share it. Is it there? No, is it there?
So while Dean's doing that, I'd just like to thank everyone for coming, and especially to the speakers for joining us. This was a really rich discussion and left us with a lot to talk about and move forward with.
And thank you, Michele Fazio. Judge Agnes, Your Honor, it was just really wonderful that you joined us with those ideas at the very end. And it's just a rich bunch of folks that want to keep this memory alive. Here's Jake and the Infernal Machine.
Take anything out of a hat and put 'em in
Well, thank you, everybody. Michele, Stephanie, Adrienne, Stephanie, Jake, Judge Agnes, Leonard, Jerry, David, all kinds of other folks who have joined us now. Judith Walcott, whose grandma was Mrs. Gertrude Winslow, who we know well. She was a founding light of this church. Keep the faith, everybody. And let's keep the conversation going. If you ever want to stop by Community Church and see the plaque and look through the documentation and the archives that we have on the plaque and on Sacco and Vanzetti, feel free to be in touch. We'd be glad to do that for you, give you a little tour of not only our auditorium, but our archives. And if it's raining, I'll take you in the basement and you can help us mop up the water. Shall we say good night, everybody?
Good night.
Stay in
Thank
touch.
you.
Do good work.
Good night, all.
Thank you,
Good
Michelle.
night, everyone.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks,
Thank
Michelle.
you.
Sacco and Vanzetti presentes.
Presente.
And we